Welcome and thank you for joining today's working group meeting where we'll update you on technical assistance projects and resources developed through our partnership with DOE and the national labs. You will hear from Lawrence Berkeley Lab, National Renewable Energy Lab, NREL, and the Pacific Northwest National Lab, which have been working with various of you on a variety of projects and products. I also extend this welcome on behalf of NARUC. I remind everyone that this is a NASEO-NARUC collaborative. We're very pleased to be working with NARUC on this. And I'll acknowledge she was unable to join us today. Danielle Sass-Burnett is the corresponding lead on the NARUC side for this working group. I also want to acknowledge Ed Carley, who's my colleague at NASEO, who has been working very strongly and very much on GEB and demand flexibility, and also manages our buildings program. First, Ed, next slide, please. A little bit on logistics. Please mute if you are not speaking. This is a relatively small group, so I think we can use both the chat function as well as raising your hand and unmuting yourself at the Q&A period. There will be a period for this. We will be providing the recording and slides afterwards. Next, please. Just a very, very short reminder of the states that are involved in the working group. We're up to 22. We had a number of states join in the last several months. Again, many thanks to Hannah Terwilliger and Casey Radcliffe for their leadership of their group and their enthusiasm for this, which has helped move us along. Next slide, please. And I'm just whizzing through this so we can go to the main show, but I did want to remind you of several upcoming gebinars and webinars. Our friends in Colorado are going to be presenting, actually it's an NREL presentation on work done with the Colorado Energy Office, Excel Energy, and Rocky Mountain Institute on a residential retrofit energy district project, which is very GEB oriented. We will also be having on August 10th another webinar that we are hosting with, I believe, the PNNL effort on pilots will be featured. You will hear some of that today, but we will delve further into this. And we understand that the Connected Communities awards will be may be available by that time, so there may be an opportunity to have some discussion and learn about that as well. And our colleagues at NARUC, a couple of days after that, will be having a webinar on virtual power plants. I also want to remind you of some resources that we have on the GEB resources page. You all know from our emailings that the National GEB Roadmap had been released from the Department of Energy. General Services Administration put out a blueprint for GEB in energy savings performance contracting. More recently, there's a guidehouse document on incentive mechanisms that's more regulatory oriented, which I think would be probably of great interest to most, if not all of you. A reminder of a couple of our recent NASEO reports on state and local building policies, such as benchmarking, performance standards, codes, even zoning. And another report that we did that was oriented toward state and public building operations and upgrades, including performance contracting and energy as a service mechanisms, way to bring in demand flexibility into those sorts of mechanisms. So I think with that, I will hand this over to Natalie to run the main show. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Rod. Let me see, I will share my screen. Okay.
That's really groovy.
I do. That's the new Mac update. It surprised me when it showed up. you know, because it used to be the mountains in Catalina, but that's what it looks like now. It's very vivid. Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name's Natalie Frick. I'm going to kick us off, and then I'll hand it over to some of my lab colleagues. Today, we are going to hear from all three labs. I'm going to start us off talking about a couple work products that LBNL is working on. The first one is on the Demand Flexibility Potential Guide, and I have some questions. We have about 8 poll questions, so get ready for those. And then the second topic I'll cover is the legislative and regulatory language for opportunities for states to incorporate demand flexibility into their energy policy. And then I'll hand it over to Joyce McLaren from NREL, and she'll be talking about their work on a paper on prioritizing demand flexibility investments. And then she will hand it over to Juliet Homer and Christine Holland from PNNL to talk about their pilots paper. And then I'll be back with my colleague Lisa Schwartz to talk about some technical assistance we've been providing directly to states, Arizona, Connecticut, and Wisconsin specifically. So, talked about this study, the Estimating Demand Flexibility Potential. It's a guidance document for states in December, and we summarized 4 different demand response potential studies in that meeting. And the recording of that and the slides are available on NASEO's website, but as a refresher, we're developing the document so that states and local governments that are interested in estimating demand flexibility potential along with efficiency can use it to guide and scope their work. And it'll provide a review of current methods and tools that states are using to consider demand flexibility and demand response studies. And so right now our outline that we have for the report is, you know, helping states figure out the purpose, technologies, the type of potential you're interested in, the scenarios you might want to look at, load forecast, which is very important when you're trying to figure out how much you can save and move and shift, the analysis approach, tools that are available to be used, and then challenges. And we'll probably have some examples of how states have overcome some of those challenges in the analysis that they've been doing, states and utilities. So I want to move on to our first poll, which, Ed, if you can launch it, it's, are you planning to conduct or currently conducting a demand flexibility potential study in your state? And you can chat some other answer in if you'd like, but we're just looking for a quick answer from everybody on this. And I guess, Ed, when you get to a number that you think is appropriate, we can close it. And in absence of that, I guess we'll give it another 10 seconds.
All right, we're at a little bit more, well, just shy of 2/3. So I'm going to end the poll now.
Okay, we can, I think you can share the results if you'd like. All right, so we definitely want to talk to people who are conducting the demand flexibility potential study, because I want to make sure that we're providing useful information to you and then also learning from the challenges that you're having, and definitely the maybe later people. So that's great to hear. Let's see, so moving on to our next slide, or excuse me, our next poll, which is, do you have input or questions about the potential guide that you would like us to follow up with you about? So hopefully when we get the answers for these polls, they'll be associated with each of your names. So if you hit yes, I'll know that you're interested in having another conversation and I can follow up with you directly. And then we can have you and other members of your team, if you'd like, talk with us. And again, if you said yes, that you are conducting one, I'll probably reach out to you, even if you don't say yes on this one. So Ed, you can let me know when we're good on this poll.
All right, we're at 8 of 21 right now. Some more trickling in. Give it 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
I like the countdown. That's good.
So we got 11 to 21 this time. So let me put these up. Okay,
great. Well, I will be following up with the people who responded yes. So thank you for that answer. And I'll move on to the second topic that I wanted to cover before I hand it over to Joyce, and that's the state opportunities to promote demand flexibility. And we talked about this for a couple meetings. We've talked about this. We're developing model language for states and local governments to include demand flexibility in their energy-related goals. And in our meeting, I think this was also in the December meeting, we talked about model language for benchmarking, transparency, and reporting, building performance standards, and peak demand reductions in energy efficiency resource standards. And some of that material is also in NASEO's report that came out a few months ago in February on state and local building policies for efficiency and demand flexibility. So that's just a refresher of what that project is about. We're interested in what your needs are so we can prioritize developing language around those needs. And then I think I have maybe 3 poll questions on this that I wanted to cover. So Ed, if you can bring those up. This first one is about energy efficiency resource standards. So are you interested in model legislative or regulatory language to assist your state in incorporating demand flexibility into EERSs, specifically related to the following? And I gave you some choices there. You can also chat us a different answer if you have one. Or again, you know, I know you all have my email. You can follow up with me directly if you have a different response as well. This is a topic we're thinking about focusing on next. And so I just am curious if it's something that is of interest, and then also, you know, it will help us prioritize what we work on next for this project. And then Ed, let me know when we're getting close to a good number of people to close the poll.
Okay, I might give it just a couple more seconds. We've got about 38% of the attendees, 8 of 21. Still some votes trickling in. All right, going 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Thank you.
Oh, share, sorry. Gotta hit the share button.
Sure. Okay, great. So people are interested in methodologies and interaction with other utility planning processes and data access. Okay, that is helpful. And then whoever said that they would put their specific area of interest in the chat, we will check that out. I can't actually look at it right now since I'm presenting, but thank you. So my next question is on energy planning and demand flexibility. Are you interested in model legislative or regulatory language to assist your state in incorporating demand flexibility into energy planning, specifically related to the following? And then again, I gave you some choices, and if you want to type in the chat your own answer, please do so. And then Ed, if you want to start that poll, thank you. We'll leave this open for a little bit. I'll give you some commentary about the weather in Ohio right now while you fill out your poll. It recently started pouring rain, so I don't have to water my plants. That makes me happy. That's about all I've got.
All right, we will give it 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and we're closing the poll.
Thank you. Okay, great.
Should have the...
People are interested in everything, so that's good to know as well, with IRP at the top of the list. Okay, excellent, thank you. And then,
I'll interrupt
don't
for
worry.
a moment to note that Lindsay Anderson has indicated interest in examples of demand flexibility in building performance standards.
Okay. And that's something that IMT has been working on as well. And so I've been trying to collaborate with them on that. So that's great. Thanks, Lindsay. And then just to let you know, you're over halfway through the polls, and that's the last one. This is the last one for this session, and it's on appliance standards and demand flexibility. So are you interested in a state peer sharing webinar on incorporating demand flexibility into appliance standards? And then I gave you some options there of different appliances. And again, you can chat a response into us, and Ed, if you want to start the poll, that'd be great. So this would be more about states that are currently working on these standards, providing information to all of you as opposed to someone from the lab talking about it, so more of kind of a peer sharing exercise. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing so Joyce can get, oh, actually, no, I'm gonna advance Joyce's slides for her, so never mind. And let me know when
we're at about the same number that we've gotten for the last couple, so I'm going to close it.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, share. I always forget to hit that.
No problem. Okay, excellent. So heat pump water heaters and electric resistance. Energy Star appliances. Okay, thank you. And I will now hand it over to Joyce, who's going to be talking about their work at NRO. And Joyce, just let me know when to move your slides forward.
And hop to the next slide. I think we have an agenda.
Sure.
So today I'll be talking about a project that we've mentioned to you a couple times before, I believe, on looking at how to prioritize demand flexibility investments. And we did a poll earlier in the year. It's been a number of months now to get your input on what kinds of information would be really useful as you make decisions about investing in demand flexibility measures. And so today I wanted to give you an update on the analysis that we're conducting and the report that will come out of it on that topic. So I'll go over the goal and the focus of the analysis, the method that we're using, a little bit about the data, some very preliminary results. And I want to emphasize that these are not results that we would want you to cite or take as written in stone. They're very early, but they give you a gist of the types of outputs that you'll be getting out of this analysis and the way that we plan on displaying those results. So any feedback on that would be really helpful at this point. And then I'll just touch on the next steps and the timeline of when you can expect to see more on this. Next slide, please. So the challenges that we heard from all of you as we scoped out what would be useful in this topic area, the challenges that we heard from you is that the main electricity system challenges in the states are the summer peaks that are driven by cooling loads or winter peaks driven by heating loads and lighting loads. We heard from you that emissions reductions were a high priority in terms of state level goals, and that there's a lack of information about which measures and how to invest in demand flexibility in order to really get a high value. So those were what we heard from you. Those are the challenges we heard from you, and that's what we designed this analysis to try to address. So next slide, please. So our goal was to provide actionable information on the potential of the potential impact of demand flexibility investments, with the goal of informing program design, incentive design, which you said was really the main mechanism that was being used within the states to encourage demand flexibility. Also in legislative or regulatory action. And then on a little bit lower level, the building owner investment. So what type of investment should a building owner make in order to get the highest value? The outputs of the analysis are going to be basically the impact of implementing different efficiency and demand flexibility measures. And we're focusing this particular analysis on large office buildings of 500,000 square feet approximately. That was also based on a survey, a poll question that we gave you asking what building types were of most interest. And we heard that government buildings and office buildings were of most interest. So there was no typical government building that would fit that definition, but we figured that large office building was pretty close to what a government building could be called. So we chose large office buildings to focus on. We can, in the future, look at other building types, but we thought we'd start here. The metrics that we're using are avoided emissions, electricity system cost savings, so cost savings from the system's perspective, and then from the building's perspective, what the utility bill savings would be. And we'll be looking at those metrics on an individual building level, and then also aggregated to a regional level, so based on sort of how many buildings are there in a particular area, so that you can see where the potential is greatest. So which areas, which counties would you want to focus on, or which balancing areas would you want to focus on for your incentives? So next slide, please. I'm not sure about that. The measures that we're looking at are listed here on the left. Basically, we'll be looking at energy efficiency measures and demand flexibility measures, both individually and in various combinations that make sense. There's about 16 combinations that we're focusing on, and I won't list those out, but basically there's a lot of combinations of factors that we're looking at. Ends up to be about 4,000 and something different combinations. And so we're considering the interplay of these different measures, both by themselves and as they're implemented together. So you can't just look at what happens if you implement one measure and then pile that result on top of another measure. You actually kind of have to look at how they interplay within a building, and we're able to do that with some really cool tools and models that we have available. So that's exciting. And then we'll be identifying out of all those many different combinations, what are the highest value packages of measures. And that's going to differ by region. So all of the results will be provided by region. The next slide, please. So just really briefly, the methodology that we're using is for each EMM region, we will model, we have modeled the office building load both before and after implementing efficiency and demand flex, or DR type measures. That was done using our SCOUT model, if you're familiar with that. Then we characterize the associated emissions reductions from implementing those measures and the system cost savings. That's using a data set called Cambium that we've developed at NREL and LBNL. And we're also characterizing the customer bill savings based on some representative utility rates, including demand charge and time of use rates. That's being done using NREL's REOPT model. And then we're identifying the depth of potential within each region using building stock data. And that's coming from another source within NREL. So basically then we'll be able to summarize what are the highest value demand flexibility measures and the key locations for implementing those measures where you get the highest value. The next slide, please. These are the tools and data sets that I mentioned just for your reference. And I just wanted to mention here kind of a general challenge that we've had as we develop this new methodology for doing this analysis is this challenge of different granularities across different data sets in terms of regional, the way that the data set is broken down regionally, and then also the way that the tools are sometimes not interconnected, and so we have to be sure that inputs and outputs sync up properly, that kind of thing. So it's been quite a process to develop this method and to combine all of these really awesome data sets and tools to conduct this analysis. Next slide, please. So here's some very preliminary results. As I said, this is just to give you a flavor of the types of outputs that we get. I just chose a couple of examples of combinations of measures. So this slide is showing a combination of measures that includes efficiency of HVAC, so improving efficiency of HVAC, improving efficiency of lighting, and installing plug load efficiency measures in a single large office building. So what you see in the charts is, if we look at California's, you see a baseline load of a single office building in blue. And then you see the same office building after the these 3 efficiency measures have been implemented in the building, you see the change in the load profile in orange. And this is for a typical week or just a week of the year, just to give you a sense of how the load changes after those measures are implemented. And so we show the same thing for Texas and for upstate New York. So next slide, please. So then what we do is look at what the, based on the Cambium data set that tells us about the marginal emissions and marginal system cost information for each region, we can say, okay, so what would be the carbon emissions of this office building making these efficiency investments in different parts of the country? So I want to emphasize here, don't worry too much about what the number on the sliding green scale is, because we're really early in our analysis, and I actually intentionally didn't want you to be able to see too well what the numbers are. The idea is we can compare right now today across different regions, but the dark green regions, basically, you're going to see for a single office building, there's a really much higher savings where there's a darker green avoided cost of CO2 and grid savings wherever it's darker green. And you can see that it's really pretty dispersed across the country, and we can hone in on where these measures end up providing higher value for this building type. So the type of information that we're able to see with this analysis is a lot more detailed than what we've been getting out of previous efforts that have been, they've been, of course, very interesting, but they haven't really provided regional information and information that's specific to individual building types and individual measure packages. So that was really our goal here, was to give some more granular outputs and more granular information to aid decision making. So the next slide, please. Just another example of a different package. So this package of measures includes energy efficiency of the building envelope, and with the addition of pre-cooling DR measure in again, a single large office building. And again, you can see the change in the building load, shifting the load. In the case of California, you can kind of see how shifting with pre-cooling is happening for the efficiency load profile. And you can also see that in some cases, that shifting is causing the peak to be at a different time of day. So there's a lot going on in these load profiles and in these maps as well. And one of our upcoming tasks is going to be to really dive into these profiles and to these maps and to understand the whys. So why is it doing this? Why is it shifting it this way? Why is the peak higher there? Why is this region darker green? Why is this region not darker green? So all of those whys are things that we're going to have to dive into in the coming months. But this, again, is just a flavor for the types of information. The next slide, please. Again, here's the maps for that particular package of measures. So the last slide, I think, is just giving a little heads up about our next steps and timeline. We'll be looking for what the highest value measures and combinations of measures are for each region. Like I said, there's thousands of combinations, so a lot for us to dive into in the coming months. We'll be also working on that piece to calculate the build savings at the individual building level for representative utility rates in each region. That's something that we're well on our way to completing, but I didn't have any images to share with you today on that piece. And then we'll be, of course, reporting out on aggregating those results across an entire region so that you can see the depth of the potential in the region. So you can really know where to focus your incentives and efforts. So our tentative timeline is that we'd like to have a full draft of this available for you to review by the end of the summer. And I'm happy to take any questions. And I'm very much happy to take any suggestions for how we can make this particular analysis most useful, how the results, how the display of the results looks to you, and whether you have suggestions on how you might use this or comments on how you might use this going forward. That's all I have.
Thanks, Joyce. I guess we can pause here for a moment and see if anybody wants to unmute and ask any questions or add a question in the chat, and we can answer it later, whatever people would like.
This is
You're
Rodney.
also welcome to email me.
This is Rodney. While others may be thinking questions, one that came up is using the Cambium and REOPT model, could a state posit alternative or scenarios of different sort of rate structures? So you're doing this analysis based on certain typical or example utility rates in different regions. Could one do this with different rate structures and see how things would work if, say, time of use was introduced in state X?
That's certainly feasible. You could, as a follow-on to this study, you could choose areas where it looks like a tweak in the rate structure, maybe an increased demand charge or a different time of use structure might be beneficial. And so one could certainly do more analysis going forward to identify how those tweaks would impact the results.
Great, because I'm thinking about how the states may be able to use this in terms of not only understanding potential under current regulatory and policy environment, but how those policies and regulations may be altered, recommendations for doing so.
Yeah, that's a great comment. And I'll absolutely include that in ideas for future work.
Thanks, Joyce. Juliet, are you going to kick us off for PNNL?
Yeah, I sure am. Hi, everybody. I'm Juliet Homer with Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, and I'll be presenting today with Christine Holland, also from PNNL. And as Rodney said, we're going to be doing a designated webinar coming up. So we'll go through this relatively quickly to make sure we've got time for Natalie and Lisa to present after this. But basically, we're going to be talking about pilot considerations for grid interactive efficient buildings. We're going to touch on the purpose of the work that we're doing with states on pilots. And what we're doing right now, we're working with Washington and Hawaii developing technical briefs on pilots, grid interactive efficient building pilots. So we'll touch on those. We'll touch on the metrics that we're looking at and then provide a status. We've got a few poll questions, and then we'll touch on next steps. So the next slide. Yeah, so GEBs, as we know, potentially very beneficial, but they are complex and new. So we think that pilots can be a great way to start a conversation in states between utilities, state energy offices, and PUCs to help increase familiarity and comfort with GEBs. So part of the purpose of our technical assistance is to help to create clarity and a common language on what GEBs are and the services that they can provide, talk about the challenges and barriers to GEBs and pilots, and then try to illuminate how GEBs can tie to specific state energy goals and other state policies, maybe not necessarily energy centered, things around equity or resilience, but how GEBs can actually tie into those as well. And then we provide metrics that could be tested through pilots. And then also we provide some general considerations to help increase the potential for success of GEB pilots. So that's really what we're covering in the technical briefs. The next slide. So in terms of the overview of what we're including in these briefs, we help to establish just the basics of GEB, as we said, to help that kind of common language for states to talk to utilities and other stakeholders. And then we're trying to be really clear about grid usable benefits from GEBs. And then, as I said, identifying specific utility or state energy mandates and other priorities that could be addressed through GEBs. And then we're summarizing potential pilot project goals, metrics, and data, as well as providing other considerations for GEB. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Christine Holland to dive into a little bit more of the specifics on the briefs.
Hello there. Great, can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, super duper. Okay, so as Juliet mentioned, an important part of the brief was arriving at common definitions, GEB definitions. What are all the benefits that GEB can provide? And we leaned heavily on the DOE's Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy publications for these definitions. And if there was any gray areas or slight discrepancies, we defaulted to the roadmap, which recently came out, a wonderful publication. And we also used graphics from the roadmap, which explains how building technology, the technological systems work together, in addition to all of the GEB definitions. Additionally, we realized that it's sometimes easiest to bring it all together with an example. So we provided a detailed example of the Basalt Vista Connected Community in Colorado. We thought that was a great example because it included a wide variety of GEB technologies, from energy efficiency to battery storage, and equally important, it displayed all of the fabulous capabilities of interconnectivity. The homes were able to share resources in this connected community so that they could optimize costs. They were able to act as a microgrid. So this example addressed resilience. Basalt Vista also had the ability to act as a grid resource. And lastly, it was an example of a low income community. So it demonstrated equity applications. So we provided details on Basalt Vista. We also listed a variety of other examples in the appendix. Then in the next box, the energy mandates and priorities that could potentially be addressed through GEB. This is the box that is most state specific, where we go into state details regarding policies and rules that are foundational for GEB creation. Every state is at a different starting position where they are with regard to grid planning, DER, integration capabilities, and even carbon standards. So we looked at what are the playing fields for each of these states to help inform their pilot decisions or understand what policy avenues they may want to go down to support GEB pilot development. And in the last box, we looked at the all of the metrics related to these potential energy goals that they're wanting to address, and metrics that could be tested and measured through the pilot. And we talk about these in a little bit greater detail on the next slide. Yeah, so on slide 29, we recognize that there's a really strong symbiotic relationship between the grid outcomes and customer participation. You cannot silo these two buckets. The only way the grid benefits can be realized is if the technology is adopted and retained by the building owners and operators. So if you test technological impact on the grid, the counterpart is you need to understand the impacts on the technology adopter. So in a nutshell, we define what the metrics are and the data needs are that could be tested through a pilot. So we've highlighted the various metrics in these two boxes for the grid and for customer participation. And yeah, next slide. So on this slide, we just want to give you an update of what's happening with Washington. We have a draft out to Washington, and some of the specific requests, as Juliet mentioned, Washington wanted a common language. So we made sure to address that in the introduction of the technical brief. Additionally, when we had originally drafted the technical brief, we had it coming from a variety of perspectives, not just utilities, but also the state and the building owners. And they asked that we simplify it and come primarily from the perspective of the utilities, since they would be developing the pilots. So we did that. Additionally, we went into specifics about the different GEB priorities based on their state goals. So we started with mandates coming from the Washington state legislator on utility resource planning. And we also were sure to include other policies and rules related to emissions and electrification of transportation, along with state energy strategy goals that tangentially or directly impact GEB, or that the GEB pilot could influence or alleviate in terms of energy state strategies, electricity strategies. For Hawaii, we had a much more extensive list of dockets and policies that could potentially be addressed or alleviated with GEB technologies. So we addressed these in the technical brief. Luckily, we are part of the monthly GEB working group that Hawaii puts on. So we've learned a lot about what's going on in Hawaii and how engaged they are and what they're looking for. We're hoping to address with the GEB pilot. And we're looking at a lot of the dockets that Hawaii has that, again, either directly or indirectly addresses GEB. We found a lot of good information on their integrated grid planning and how DERs and demand response can influence GEB development, either directly or indirectly. The grid modernization and their renewable energy targets. Again, there's information in here about funding sources and what the state of development is regarding, or evolution regarding, DERs that could relate to GEB development. So we are in the process of developing our first draft for Hawaii, and we hope to have it to them soon. And we anticipate having a completed draft by the end of August. And lastly, we recognize that there are differences between the states, as I had mentioned. Each state is at a different starting point regarding their set of circumstances that could influence GEB development. And we're finding some of the biggest influencers are carbon targets. Both Washington and Hawaii have very aggressive carbon targets and renewable portfolio standards. And obviously GEB has the potential to greatly reduce load, so this is of great importance to them. Additionally, obviously electricity prices and rates will play a big role in GEB valuation. Avoided costs in Hawaii are much higher than Washington, so GEB inherently has more value in Hawaii at this time. And another perspective, another issue that's important to address between the states is who has the potential to implement demand flexibility programs and then potentially GEB pilots. So in Washington, it's primarily utilities, whereas in Hawaii, it's not just utilities, but there are other organizations and DER and DR aggregators and implementers that can participate in GEB pilot creation and execution. And so I'm going to turn it back to Juliet, but I just wonder if there's any questions at this point before she moves on to the poll questions.
Okay. Yeah, you can always email us. We're very reachable, so please let us know if you have any questions. All right, so let's move on to poll number 6. And this is about, are you interested in a state peer sharing webinar on regulatory considerations for utility demand flexibility or grid interactive efficient building pilot programs? So please click all that apply if you're interested in a potential webinar to learn from each other on regulatory considerations for demand flexibility and GEB pilots. Particularly where, you know, some of the options are if you're interested in developing requirements for pilots, reviewing pilots, approving, overseeing scaling and demonstrations, or cost recovery, or if this is not of interest. So.
This is Rodney. Question does arise, and this has occurred before. In talking about pilots, some people think primarily of physical pilots. A building is, or a set of buildings is operating equipment and is demand flexible and so on, as contrasted with a regulatory pilot of, in these buildings, we're trying a different rate design, or we're doing critical peak pricing, or you know, something of that nature. Has your work been looking at both, or one or the other?
Both. Yeah, I think that's a good point, Rodney.
Good.
And both are needed. Yeah, absolutely.
Great.
Okay, good on this one. Can we close the poll?
Yeah, we've got a pretty good response rate. I'll give it 5 more seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and we'll close it out. And I'll hit share this time.
Okay, good. This is really interesting. Thank you. Okay, so it really looks like the requirements, and if we can make sure and capture that. I know sometimes after you do Zoom, it's hard to capture this. So Natalie or Rodney, I hope maybe you can capture that image before we move on to the next one. Okay. All right, so let's move on to the next one. So PNNL also has expertise in energy building codes. And so we wanted to check and see, this is kind of shifting gears a little bit, but would you be interested in a state peer sharing webinar on incorporating the following into building energy codes: demand flexibility, net zero buildings, or decarbonized buildings, and select all that apply? So we can go ahead and launch that next poll. Poll number 7.
Sorry, I was trying to make sure I had set it to multiple choice before I launched it, and I
Okay,
had.
thank you. So again, a peer sharing webinar, we're learning from each other and maybe having a speaker as well on you know, some of the work we've been doing on these building energy codes for demand flexibility, net zero energy, decarbonized buildings.
Got some answers still trickling in here.
Okay.
Give people about 10 more seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and we will close it out.
Okay, good. All right. So it looks like decarbonized buildings, most interest, about half for demand flexibility and 70% for net zero energy. Great. Okay, thank you for your input on those. So we're going to finalize the Washington brief. We're going to finalize the Hawaii brief. As we said, we've got that webinar coming up next month. And I think Rodney mentioned August 10th, and we had August 3rd. So we'll get that date correct and make sure we'll get it back to you. And then depending on funding and how things move forward, we may continue to develop some briefs. We've heard some interest from Michigan and Minnesota. We've engaged with them initially. So that may happen down the road. So that's it for us. I'll turn it back to Natalie.
Thank you, Julia and Christine. So this is our last topic, which is good because we're about at the end of our time. So Lisa Schwartz and I are going to talk about 3 different states that we've been providing direct technical assistance to. And Lisa, if you are unmuted and ready to go, you're up first.
I am. Hi, everyone. I'm Lisa Schwartz with Berkeley Lab. And I see that we have Barbara Keene from the Arizona Corporation Commission with us. Welcome, Barbara. So any tough questions you have, we can direct to her on the slide. So I've been really enjoying working with Arizona Corporation Commission staff on a filing that the commissioners required the utility Arizona Public Service to file. It's really a first of its kind tariff in a lot of ways. It would permit aggregators, third parties to bring forward groups of distributed demand side resources. So this is not exactly DERs because it doesn't include distributed generation. So it's energy efficiency, demand response, and storage. And the tariff must provide compensation for a really wide variety of values to the electricity system, including energy, capacity, demand reduction, load shifting, locational value, and voltage support. So what's happening right now is the utility filed a draft request for proposals with the commission to inform the design of the tariff and help the utility determine the feasibility and how to value these aggregated demand side resources for providing different products. And so they've got these three products that, some of which are more pilot in nature, like ancillary services. And so we've worked with commission staff to help review the draft RFP in detail. And we're working with the staff on potential changes that staff might ask the utility make before the RFP in final is issued. The expected date is next Wednesday, so this is happening all right now. The other areas where Berkeley Lab will be providing assistance to the commission staff are in supporting stakeholder workshops on how the commission staff will evaluate the tariff when it comes in the door and make recommendations to the commission. The commission was quite specific in its order in April, so this has to do with the policy objectives of the tariff, rate design, the operating characteristics of the resources that are eligible, how to review the utility's valuation of all of these different operating characteristics. All of the special conditions in the tariff are really important for success. And we also want to look at impacts on non-participants, as well as the measures of tariff success for example, how many consumers are participating, how many aggregators are participating. So we'll also, in the end, assist with review of the tariff. It's now been delayed to May 1st, and that includes modeling impacts on households, primarily estimating the bill impacts for eligible customers and the load impacts for those customers, as well as the utility system. And we're going to leverage some work we did earlier. There's a link here on developing net load shapes for behind the meter storage and assessing dispatch of storage aggregations in different scenarios. First, in various combinations with other resources like solar and demand response. And second, under various types of tariffs for solar and demand response. And the stakeholder workshops are going to begin in no later than December, I believe the commission ordered. Natalie?
Thanks, Lisa. So the last two slides we have, I'll try and wrap us up with maybe 1 minute for additional questions, but you can always reach out to us again if you have other thoughts or feedback. So we're providing technical assistance to the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection in Connecticut. And it's on the forthcoming 2022 to 2024 conservation load management plans that the utilities and the Connecticut Efficiency Board put together. And we are trying to identify opportunities for the utilities to incorporate additional demand flexibility into their conservation load management plans. And we will be providing those suggestions and opportunities to DEEP later or next month, early next month, for them to review and consider. And our process for that is we've talked to the Connecticut Efficiency Board consultants, which are EFG, and then DEEP and staff there, as well as the utilities. And we're going to send the memo directly to DEEP, so it won't be publicly available unless they decide to file it, but we will be able to share the recommendations that we make for programs and utility program suggestions. So we're happy to share that with the group. And right now we're looking for programs that are EE programs that focus on peak demand reductions and time-sensitive value, DR programs that focus on smart technology and energy management, and then programs that have lots of multiple DERs, not lots. So that's what we're doing in Connecticut, and that's all work that we're doing right now. And then in Wisconsin, we've provided technical assistance to the Public Service Commission for their Roadmap to Zero Carbon investigation, which is a docket, an investigation docket that they opened in March. And they opened the docket for a variety of different reasons, and that's what's listed in the sub-bullets there. So the utilities have carbon dioxide emission reduction goals. There is an executive order that establishes a goal of achieving 100% carbon-free electricity. There's recommendations from the Energy Distribution Technology Initiative, and then also from the Governor's Task Force on Climate Change. And so we wrote a memo to the commission staff, and that should be becoming publicly available in the very near future, because I believe they're going to file it in the docket. And we identified opportunities to use efficiency and demand flexibility in this investigation, or as part of the roadmap, so in the investigation. And we organized it around kind of 6 groups of suggestions. So establishing an analytical process, aligning the policy goals and metrics, addressing data needs, identifying evaluation metrics, and encouraging collaboration and innovation, and then finally supporting enabling strategies such as market transformation. So that is some work that hopefully we'll be able to share with you very soon. And with that, I believe here is all of our contact information, or at least one person from each lab, if you don't have it already. And I think we might have like 28 seconds left or something before we're at the top of the hour, but I'm available to take questions. I don't have anything after this, so I'm happy to stay on the line. And I will stop sharing and see, I guess, Rod, if you have anything you'd like to add.
Yeah, thank you. This is great. I do want to allow time for people to ask questions if they have, and encourage them to do so. I did put in the chat, we did post the PDF of the slides, although I just took a quick check and the links are not live, so we will fix that and get that posted. This is great. We're looking forward to continued work in collaboration among all the parties here to advance things. And I'm gratified to see in the polling results interest in continued exchanges and webinars on particular topics that are most practical to each of the states here. So very, very enthusiastic about the rest of the year and the coming period to move forward on this. Stay tuned. I don't know if Monica is still on the line, but the Connected Communities awards will be made later, I assume during the summer, somewhere around then. And there's an awful lot going on in this space. And we have been trying to keep the resources relatively up to date, but not overwhelming where every single article that's relevant is posted, because then it would be a deep morass. But instead we try to be a little bit selective.
Thanks, Rod. It doesn't look like we have any questions that are coming up in the chat, but as I said, I know we're 1 minute over our time allocated, but if anybody has any questions or comments, I'm able to stay on the line. And anybody else who would like to stay on the line as well until Ed kicks us all out. But in the absence of additional questions, thank you all for participating in the call. We appreciate your input and feedback, and we look forward to continuing to do work with you.
All right.
And thank you. We're very fortunate to have this collaboration among all of us. This is great.
Yeah. Thanks, Natalie, and thanks National Labs for the great presentation.